A win against the Racers is certainly assumed, but should you bet on Missouri against Murray State? Are style points important? Let's talk about all that and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, still no word on the uniform combinations for this week, but some Missouri fans already pining for the nostalgia of the James Franklin, Matty Mock, and Drew Lock eras of Missouri football uniforms. Let's do a quick project run play at some point later in the show. Before we get started, though, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. By the way, speaking of FanDuel, the conventional wisdom is Georgia-Clemson. Boy, that's going to be a great game, huh? But is it? I'm not so sure. I want to talk more about in games of Missouri interest from around the country in the show. But you know what? Let's talk actually about the Missouri betting line to start the program. I want to just give you a quick, what I think is a betting guide for Missouri and Murray State. And really in the past, this is sort of a recent phenomenon that especially early, before like a day or two before the game, well, there's been a line on this Missouri game against FCS opponent Murray State for a while here. And for years, well, FBS opponents against FCS opponents, Division I versus Division I AA, if you will, to use the old type of language there, those games just weren't given lines, especially not this early. So I thought it was a little bit surprising that Missouri and Murray State even had a line a few weeks ago. Well, one thing that has happened, the Tigers were minus 47.5 last week over at FanDuel Sportsbook. The Tigers now down a point, minus 46.5. That may not sound like a huge difference, because it's really not a huge difference, quite honestly. But it does probably tell you that most of the money right now is probably sliding against Missouri. Now, the thing is, I'm never going to bet against Missouri, right? I'd say the main part about betting, at least for this podcaster, is having fun with it, putting a little bit of action on the game. Well, there's nothing fun for me as a Missouri fan about taking the plus 46.5. I hope the Tigers win 1,000,000-0, or as big as they can. But again, if anything here, there's no way that I'm going to bet. This is a stay away, is the point. There's no way I'm taking Missouri minus 46.5. If you think back to last season's FCS game against South Dakota, well, the Tigers won 35-10, and really all around the entire for the entire duration of the Eli Drinkwitz era, that's basically been the pattern here, the modus operandi, which is, yeah, we're going to put away the FCS opponent, but it's not going to be a Josh Heupel, Barry Odom era where you're seeing a 78-0 victory over Delaware State or something like that. Missouri has a very, very good offense this season, or at least it's expected to. It had a very good offense last season, but the Tigers also don't make it a habit out of playing at warp speed. Again, like the Josh Heupel era Missouri offenses do, or did in the past, or indeed like the Tennessee offenses do under head coach Josh Heupel to this day. Also, the Tigers run the ball plenty as well. Plenty of outside zone, plenty of jet sweeps to receivers, all that kind of good stuff. And especially, by the way, with the new rules of college football, I'm not even totally sure that this has been completely factored in, but the clock won't be stopping as frequently as well. I'll talk a little bit more about the new rules of college football here later in this program, more than likely. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm basically mentioning that until the last 2 minutes of each half now, remember, unlike in the past, the clock is not going to stop. The game clock is not going to stop to move the chain. So when there's a first down and there's that 10, 15 seconds or whatever where the game clock does not move, when the chain gang is getting set up for the next down and distance, well, that's no longer going to be the case. So what that means, obviously, fewer snaps for the offense, fewer snaps in the game, period. So whether you like that, good, bad, or indifferent, again, 46.5 points. You factor everything that I just said, Eli Drinkwitz and his recent history at Missouri, the fact that the Tigers, while a good offense, they don't play at warp speed in terms of trying to get up on the ball with 20 to 25 seconds every time on the play clock. And they have plenty of running options as well. I think you'll see plenty of Marcus Carroll, plenty of Nate Noel. And again, second half, while Missouri does have an incentive to run up the score, not only for style points for the college football playoff committee potentially, but also the SEC as well. Sure, it's a long ways down in terms of tiebreakers for the Tigers or anyone else, but margin of victory is a potential tiebreaker this season in the SEC. Still, having said all that, just based on Eli Drinkwitz and his modus operandi, I just don't think that Missouri's going to be that worried about style points, particularly in the second half. I do hope that Missouri gets a big lead, and when Drew Pine, for example, the Missouri backup quarterback, gets in the game, I hope they let him throw the ball a little bit, especially the occasional, a first down throw, maybe a play action pass, not just handoff. Oh, it's 3rd and 9. We'll let him throw a wide receiver screen pass. I'd like to see Missouri open it up a little bit more than that with the backups in. That's kind of one of my biggest complaints. I don't want to see Missouri in the second half with the first stringers in trying to run the score up. But when you put in the backups, let them run the real offense. That's something I'd like to see in the second half when hopefully Missouri has this Murray State game well in hand. So again, just to recap, don't bet against Missouri. Listen, if I had to bet a side, I would take Murray State. But again, we're trying to have fun here at Faroe Field and over at FanDuel Sportsbook. So let's just stay away there. If anything, again, based on all the factors that I just laid out for you in this segment, all of that thinking does lead me to at least lean to the under a little bit on the total. 57.5 is the over-under for this ball game. If there's anything I would take, I would lean toward the under. I'm the type of guy that's going to lean toward the under statistically. When it comes to betting anyway, there's a human psychological bias toward wanting to bet the over. It's more fun. Hey, we all like points, right? The casual football fan loves a close game with high scoring. So it's natural that people, especially your casual bettor, is going to lean more toward overs and looking for that type of bet. Well, because of that, I'm the type of guy who likes to make money and be right. So I'd lean toward the under, and because of this particular game and all the factors that I laid out in this segment, if there's anything I'd bet this week, it would be under the total of 57.5, though. As you can tell, I'm not overly confident in that particular thing either. I just know that I'm not betting the point spread for Missouri and Murray State this week. And the Missouri players and Eli Drinkwitz agreed that this was the toughest fall camp physically for the team during the Drinkwitz era at Mizzou. And Drinkwitz gave us, I think, a clue on exactly why that was the strategy for this season. I totally agree with this strategy, by the way. So let's get more into it and the rule changes that we're going to see on Thursday for this upcoming college football season. First, though, I have to admit, I have a lot of things to do today just beyond recording this podcast, and whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects at home, When you get your supplies for the project, do not forget the most essential supply of all, which is a 5-hour energy shot. Again, I have so much on my plate right now. 5-hour energy gives me that feeling of alertness and energy I need to get in the zone. With zero sugar in a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, great berry, and more flavors for everyone. You got to try them all. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. College football is back, and candidly, a lot of the national previews talk about the same 5 to 10 teams over and over again. Well, at Locked On College Football, you're going to get previews of every team in the SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and the Big 12. This is a truly unique experience. It's what makes Locked On. It's what makes the whole Locked On podcast network great, in my opinion. So again, check out the Locked On College Football podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Christian Williams, the Missouri interior defensive lineman, Eli Drinkwitz, many other people have said, hey, this was the toughest fall camp that Missouri has had under Eli Drinkwitz. And this has mirrored, as I said in a previous episode, some commentary I've seen throughout NFL camps as well, including from Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. So to me, after years of obviously the trend being, hey, we need to prevent concussions in football, first of all, and just injuries in general. Clearly, having a healthy football team at the end of the season is one of the biggest factors and variables that there is in success in the sport. So there's a real balance to be had there because, as Eli Drinkwitz said this past weekend, he said, quote, I think if you watched college football yesterday, referring to this past Saturday, you saw some tackling issues. Obviously, last night in the game, special teams certainly showed up and caused situations. 3 of the 4 games came down to the last 2 minutes. For us, it's trying to be prepared for all of those options. And again, going back to camp, I think that's a big reason why you saw more physicality in Missouri's camp and throughout football. Right now, I think last season we finally hit a tipping point, certainly in the National Football League, where a lot of teams basically hardly played anyone in the preseason, especially their first string, most important skill position type players, even their most important linebackers and edge rushers and corners and everything else. Well, again, that's caused not only in college football, but in the NFL is just a lot of really sloppy September football, in my opinion, the last few years. Again, in both leagues, in both levels, and not just with tackling. Think about penalties, procedure errors, and drop passes, and just guys not being quite on the same page. To me, especially in the era of the transfer portal, of course, you have the draft every year in the NFL, free agency and all that stuff. Of course, you always have new players entering the program via the high school ranks, but for the most part, those guys are developmental prospects. Now in 2024, every program, including Missouri, which is a very, very good program at this point, has a whole bunch of new faces. Look at Missouri's starting lineups on defense, for example. You see a whole lot of new faces. A couple new faces on the Missouri offensive line or starters on the left side as well. So all of this adds up to you need more time for continuity. You really do, in my humble opinion, because even though there are still teams in the NFL who are definitely erring on the side of caution, especially when it comes to the health of their quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner, starter, named already for the Washington Commanders. Well, he's barely even played in preseason football. Again, at least compared to rookies of years past. So, again, I'm just fascinated by this topic because there really is a balance that has to be found. And it seems like last year we may have finally found the bottom because it's starting to snap back the other way. And of course, as I mentioned on yesterday's program, Coach Drinkwitz raised some eyebrows when he said that, hey, this Murray State game, it's going to be the toughest prep we've ever had for a football game. Now, of course, a bunch of people are going, wait a second, what about your very first game at Missouri against the national champions of that season, the Alabama Crimson Tide? Well, to that point, the idea that September football is a time, well, in a way for experimentation, it's almost preseason football in some ways. Well, it's obviously a good thing, I think. If you're Eli Drinkwitz, you've got to be preferring a Murray State level of opponent to kick off the season. And quite honestly, not having a Kansas State level opponent in week 3 may not be the worst thing in the world either, especially when you're not considered the underdog. I think entering last season, most would have, certainly the betting lines reflected this, most would have considered Missouri the underdog against Kansas State. Well, this season, Missouri not really going to be sneaking up on anyone. So if anything, Missouri had the underdog's advantage last season. It's probably for the best that Missouri doesn't have a top 25 caliber type of team early in the season this year. Although you never know, Boston College, for example, could have something to say about that in week 3. Drinkwitz has also been appealing to the fans to sell out the Murray State game, even going so far as saying, hey, if we don't sell out, that tells me that our fan base is not where we need it to be right now. Well, one viewer, Hinky2Raw, asks, have we ever sold out a home opener? Well, that's a great question. I've got to assume that the answer is yes. And of course, in 2020, was that technically a sellout against Alabama where all of the available 12,000 or whatever tickets that were available for that game, were they sold? I believe they were. Now, obviously, that was not a 60 to 70,000 actual sellout, so we're not counting that one. I'd have to really think back hard and go through the openers from Missouri history, and even then, I don't think I could 100% confirm if a Missouri opener was sold out or not. So, all you Missouri historians out there, big-time fans, heck, maybe Dave Matter and Chad Moeller are out there listening or something, could you help me out here? I'm sure that Missouri has sold out a home opener before, but I just can't guarantee I know when. So, hey, let's put our heads together and figure this one out, shall we? And coming up, I do want to talk about other games of Missouri interest, or some games that at least interest myself as a Missouri fan, including Georgia and Clemson and Boston College at Florida State as well. But first, I want to tell you about Ultimate College Football HC, a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do. And this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of an actual head coach and lead your program to glory. Imagine being the actual head coach of Mizzou, from recruiting to hiring your staff, setting up training camps, handling scholarships. You handle every crucial detail. It's all in your hands. Plus, you call offensive plays during the games as well. You know what I really love about this game is, unlike the really expensive versions of, say, a running your program mode, well, you don't have to sit down in front of a $500 console. No, this game is 100% free, and you can just pick it up out of your pocket and put it down whenever you want. Very fun, very little commitment. Of course, we have a special offer for my Locked On Mizzou listeners. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a great start. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-cfb.com. That's ultimate-cfb.com, or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. And it's tailgating time, which means time to stock up on beer, brats, burgers, everything with a B. But all these B products, well, they cost a lot of cash. That's the thing. Well, with Ibata, I'm going to save you some cash, even though everything seems to be getting more expensive these days. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of at least a couple tailgates, right? Well, depending on how many friends you have. I guess I just don't have that many friends. That's my problem. But regardless, it's time you joined the more than 50 million users who use Ibata to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibata is offering my listeners $5 just for trying Ibata by using the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Ibata, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. Now, as I said before, casual fans love close, high-scoring football games. And they also love big-name opponents, of course, as well. So starting off this Saturday with, at 11 a.m., Georgia and Clemson is quite the marquee matchup, at least on paper. The conventional wisdom is, wow, what a great game. But is it, though? Because I'm pretty sure that Georgia is going to kick the crap out of Clemson, Seth. That's just my humble opinion. I just don't get good vibes from the Clemson Tigers from this offseason. And honestly, I just think Georgia is on another level from just about every team in the country at this point. Now, as to the rest of the Saturday slate, Miami, Florida at Florida is a really interesting game to me. Even though for the first time in SEC history for Missouri, Florida is not on the Tigers' schedule. I'm just really curious to see how the Gators do this season. Number one, already just a lot of pressure on Billy Napier, their head coach. And also Miami, Florida, for its part, once again, it seems like 3-4 years in a row, people are expecting the Hurricanes to take a step to maybe get back to being the Miami of old, at least taking the step to getting to that point. That's a really huge leap if you're not old enough to remember how good Miami was at certain points in the 80s and the 90s in particular. But I'm certainly interested there because Miami, if they're one of those teams, if Missouri, as it stands today, who the heck knows where we'll be in November, for instance. But as it stands here today, a lot of people are looking at Missouri as a sort of fringe playoff contender. Well, Miami, Florida, a lot of people are looking at them in the same way. So I think if Miami is going to truly be a playoff contender, they're probably going to have to win in the swamp against the Florida Gators, in my opinion. Also, another SEC team, not a Missouri opponent, though, but again, another squad that could very well be competing for Missouri in a final playoff spot. I'm talking about LSU at USC. I'm kind of leaning toward the Bayou Bengals, I have to say. Lincoln Riley hasn't lit the world on fire in Southern California yet. No Caleb Williams. I got to say, I think I'm leaning LSU on that one. But really probably the two most interesting games, especially if you're a Missouri fan, Notre Dame at Texas A&M. I'm the type of guy I think that Mike Elko is a really good coach. Texas A&M's new hire, former coach of Duke. I think he can coach. I think he can recruit. But Texas A&M, it's a really tough place to be for a whole bunch of different reasons. It's a desirable place to be for a bunch of different reasons too. Most of them about dollars and cents, of course. But that's a tough place to coach. And a first-year coach, even with the transfer portal world, always a little bit shaky, always a huge unknown in my opinion. So if the Aggies are able to win their opener against Notre Dame, it's going to be quite a statement there. It's going to be a really tough win for Missouri in College Station, almost certainly regardless. And finally, Boston College, Missouri's Week 3 opponent. I traveled to see Missouri lose a heartbreaker to Boston College in 2021. Well, the Eagles taking on Florida State, who, of course, lost in Week 1. The Noles are 15.5-point favorites. Well, you've got to think the Noles are going to be ready for this ball game. If this team has anything in it, if they're going to be any good at all, you got to think they're going to be ready to show up and possibly put a hurting on BC in their home opener. But if Boston College, if they have anything, well, we might find out in this game. Again, hard to tell sometimes in Week 1, as I just said, preseason September football. Still, though, I'm going to be very interested to see what BC has in their opener. And finally, when it comes to the Missouri uniforms, well, we don't know what the Tigers' get-ups are going to be for Murray State as I record yet. I have noticed a bunch of Missouri fans, I'm guessing guys in their 20s and 30s who went to college from, say, 2012 to 2018 when Missouri had a certain style of uniforms. In fact, give me 1 second here. I'll just reach behind myself to one of my many Mizzou football mini helmets. This one, in fact, signed by the great Henry Josie. But the point here is this big tiger paw here, the Power Cat, whatever you want to talk about, the one that's floating, that does not have the oval, the circle around it. I've noticed a lot of nostalgia for this era of uniforms and helmets recently. And I'll just say, I think they've aged pretty well. I like them. I just think they probably should be left in the past for the most part. However, I will say, for a throwback, for a one-game type of deal here in the future, maybe in 2025, what the heck? Bring them back. I'm all about it. I think it would have been cool for a 10-year anniversary type of deal of the SEC East champions, that type of deal. The 2013 team could have celebrated that, maybe would have been neat. Maybe do it for a 15-year, a 20-year type of deal. I could see this as being a very, very cool one-off. But in terms of actually going back to these full-time, I don't think I can go quite that far. But I'm interested to hear what all of you have to say, as always, in the comments on YouTube, at anywhere on social media, at Locked On Mizzou, and, of course, LockedOnMizzou@gmail.com. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.